What it takes to start a startup that's not merely successful, but is massively successful. And I'm not saying everyone has to do this. You don't have to start a startup, and if you do, you don't have to start a Google. But if you do want to start a Google, what does it take? What's the difference between a successful startup and a massively successful startup? And fortunately, I've seen enough of both types at close hand that I can see patterns of differences. So I've made a list of things that I think are different about the unicorns, and there are 9 of them. I want to get this one out of the way from the very start. In addition to having everything else that they need, the unicorns are lucky. And one of the most important kinds of luck is timing. The most successful founders have the right idea at the right time. And you have less control over that than you might think, actually, because the best ideas are not deliberate. They tend to grow organically out of the founders' lives. One of the most noticeable differences between founders of the super successful startups and the moderately successful startups is their motives. And in particular, the founders of the super successful startups never are in it mainly to get rich or to seem cool. They're always fanatically interested in what the company is doing. So this one is going to sound really obvious. To be a huge startup, you have to have a huge market. You have to make something that a lot of people will pay for, or that people will pay a lot for. When you describe the biggest startups, most all of them are doing something very basic. Google is how you find information. Facebook is where your friends are. Uber gives you rides. Airbnb gives you somewhere to sleep. I mean, these are all things you could explain in a few words to a 5-year-old. A site for a couple thousand students at one college doesn't sound like a very promising idea, does it? It may seem promising now because we all know how the story turned out, but at the time, it did not. Almost all the really big startup ideas seemed dubious at first. You also have to be ambitious, because what happens with these initially unpromising ideas is that they blossom into terrifyingly big ones. Another thing I notice about the founders of the really huge startups is that I would not want to stand between something they wanted and them. All 100% of them have exceptional drive. Early on, starting a startup is all about the product, but that changes as a startup gets really big. A founder who wants to keep running the company has to become a manager. So remember, you don't have to start a startup, and if you do, it doesn't have to be a unicorn. But if you do, this is probably what it's going to look like. An unpromising idea that blossoms into a frighteningly big one, and the driven founders who see the opportunity and run with it.